USDA stuff still happening up in Green Bay, and nobody better to help break it down than our friend Andy Herman from Pack-A-Day Podcast. Andy, good morning, my friend. How are you?
Morning, fellas. I'm doing fantastic. Thanks as always for having me on.
Doing good. The team with too many young wide receivers. Too many. Bo Melton getting his praise yesterday. Don't forget about Bo. Not Bo Jackson, but Bo Melton. LaFleur loves him. The team seems to love him. Where is his place in this crowded wideout room?
Yeah, I think that's going to be sort of the fun thing to figure out for a lot of these wide receivers and just how many mouths to feed in general they have in this offense with all 6 wide receivers, 2 tight ends that they can go to. Ben Sims is going to get time as a blocker, a couple of running backs, probably 3 running backs. So it's going to be difficult, but as Matt LaFleur said, it's a good problem to have. I've been a leader of the Bo Melton train for some time now. I thought he was fantastic at the end of last season. There was a game against Tampa before I even think he caught a ball where he got activated, where he caught my eye on tape, even though just based off of route running, he's going to have a role in this offense. They did a little 3 wide receiver set this week that included Dontavian Wicks, Jaden Reed, and Bo Melton. I'm almost positive that was the play. They were in that set when Bo Melton had the 75-yard touchdown on a beautiful ball from Jordan Love. They just have so many playmakers, and Bo Melton's one of them. He's got pure, unadulterated speed. He can get open. He can separate. As Matt LaFleur mentioned this week, he's a good blocker on the outside. He's going to have a spot. He's going to have a role. But now how you divvy up, I looked last year. They had 3,200 snaps at wide receiver a season ago. How you divvy up those 3,200 between those top 4 guys, Melton as your 5 potentially, Malik Heath if he makes it as a 6, that's going to be a really interesting conversation because 3,200 goes pretty quick when you've got 5 talented wide receivers.
Miles Bokeem Bo Melton, his official born given name. Pride of Egg Harbor, New Jersey, drafted by the Seahawks in the 7th round.
Yep.
Only 5'11", but is an absolute burner and has great hands. So I'm excited for him to find his place in this receiver room. LaFleur was asked, Andy, about the number 1 wide receiver. Who's the number 1 guy? And the answer from Matt was what you'd expect. He said, we don't have to worry about that. We got a lot of guys that can do a lot of things. Do you think there's any merit to the notion that an NFL team should have a number 1 wide receiver?
I don't think so. I think what you want to do is play to your strengths. I believe that one of Matt LaFleur's superpowers is his ability to find mismatches. And I think Brian Gutekunst went shopping for all of these different tight ends and wide receivers and said, hey, you need a big speed guy down the field. All right, well, you got Christian Watson. You want a speed guy that can work a variety of different ways, get the ball in his hands. All right, Bo Melton. You've got Jaden Reed, a slot guy. Romeo Doubs, a possession guy. You've got every sort of wide receiver. Malik Heath as a blocker. You've got a seam tight end in Luke Musgrave, and overall do-it-all tight end in Tucker Kraft. You've got all of these different weapons that you can potentially use. What does this situation, what does this play call for? And I thought, right around that Steelers game is when a lot of people said, well, that's when Jordan Love started to break out. That's when the offense started to break out. And that's when I think Matt LaFleur started to get a feel for the Musgraves, the Crafts, the Bo Meltons, the Jaden Reeds, the Dontavian Wicks. I failed to mention him, phenomenal route runner. Like, he has all these different types now. He can go and build and scheme mismatches. If you don't have a corner to match up with someone, a safety to match up with another guy, he's going to find that. And on any given day, we saw at the end of last year, once that did all start coming together, one day it was Bo Melton with 100 yards. Then it was Jaden Reed. Then it was Dontavian Wicks. We know Watson can do it. Romeo Doubs had a phenomenal playoff. So it's going to be more situation specific and more team specific. And I love that. Give me the guy that's open, and Matt LaFleur knows how to scheme those guys open.
Andy, we talked with Brian Gutekunst earlier in the week on the show, and I asked him about competition. It's kind of been the word, right? A lot of guys in there. That's what it's about. And he goes, and I said, how do you evaluate that? And he goes, at this time of year, we're not necessarily worried about evaluating. It's more about getting guys into the system so that they know what they're going to do when training camp comes. So based on what he said, what do you take away from OTAs then?
Yeah, so a couple things. I think one, you can tell they're doing exactly that. I asked Matt LaFleur, I think it was after the first practice, they were running a bunch of 7-on-7s. And I said, I could be misremembering, but I swear you said you hated 7-on-7. He's like, I do hate, he interrupted me. He's like, I hate 7-on-7s. But he's like, the goal of that specific period is to get the quarterback's footwork down. And he's like, if we have rushers, what they're focusing on then is the rushers and trying to get the ball out. And they're not focused as much on their footwork. With the offensive line, we have seen them rotate guys in and out to try to see what guys can do. I think we've seen 4 or 5 different guys at center: Zach Tom, Elton Jenkins, Sean Ryan, Josh Myers, Jacob Monk. We're seeing guys move all around the place. You can tell with a new defense, there's been a lot of walkthrough periods that they are trying to get these guys acclimated in this new system. So they know the calls, they know the checks, they know how to communicate with one another. So they know what they're doing back there. I think they want to get to training camp and really hit the ground as fast as they possibly can. So they want guys understanding all of the concepts right now, so that stuff doesn't become an issue. And with still a very young team, with a brand new defense, with guys that are still kind of trying to figure things out, I think it's a really smart way to go about it now. And then they still mixed in some competitive periods in 2 minutes and things like that, just to kind of keep things a little bit more exciting. But I kind of like that the process that they're taking, it limits injuries and it makes sure that they have the mental side down. So hopefully when they do get to camp, they can do everything that they need to do at a very fast pace and speed.
Yeah. What is your operating new kickoff rules theory as to how it's going to work, who's going to benefit, and will this be a plus for Keyshawn Nixon or a minus or neutral?
It's really interesting. I think the change that happened at the very end, going from the kickoff into the end zone or out of the end zone, going from the 35 to the 30, if all of a sudden this ends up being where players like Keyshawn Nixon are returning it past the 30 with relative ease, getting it to the 35, 40, I would not surprise me at all by the halfway through the season, maybe even before, if we're actually seeing kickers start just kicking it through the end zone. That means you don't have to spend as much time on it either in practice. You can just kick it out and not have to worry about covering it. And I think a lot of teams are going to get it at the 30. Another thing that, I could see teams doing is, I had a great conversation with Justice Mosqueda on this just today on the podcast. You could squib it down the field. And because if you squib it and it hits in the field and then goes out of the end zone, they get it at the 20. So you could specifically have a situation where teams are trying to squib it out of the end zone, which I think is going to force teams to put 2 returners back there to try to get the ball before it would squib and go out of the end zone, which is going to be interesting too. But I think Keyshawn Nixon's going to be a big enough weapon with this that he's either going to be a threat to return it, or teams are just going to say, nope, we're just going to have you start at the 30 and Green Bay's only going to have to go 70 yards every single time.
All right. The new kickoff rule is, remind me again, they start in a line, no run up at the what yard line?
That I don't know the exact yard line. I can't remember if it's the 35 or 30. Either way, what it is, I know they changed it a little bit from the way that it was in the XFL, where I think teams were. Justice was saying, I think they get it to the 29 with regularity, but now with moving, I think they moved it. Yeah, they moved it back 5 yards from what it was. So like now theoretically you would get it to the 34 every time by the same rules. So again, you're basically incentivizing them to just sort of kick it out of the end zone and have them start at the 30 rather than the average return be to the 34, which I think is actually going to potentially decrease kick returns if it ends up being that way, which would be a bummer, because I think this is going to be super exciting if it actually does happen. But if it starts just where, hey, these guys are getting it past the 30 every time, then teams are just going to get smart about it and kicking it out of the end zone.
All right, hold on a second. All kicking team players, other than the kicker, will line up with 1 foot on the receiving team's B40 yard line.
Yep.
That's what they typically call, Andy, the minus 40, meaning on the other side of the 50. But the kicker cannot cross the 50-yard line until the ball touches the ground. And the kicker would be kicking from their own 35, same as the current rule. So the kicker is booting it over a forward line of soldiers who are stationary at the plus 40. Did I say minus 40? The plus 40 is what I should say.
Yep. So that's what's going to be interesting. Yeah, it does. And that's what's going to be interesting because we even heard the Chiefs special teams coordinator talk about Justin Reed, their safety, who's actually a talented kicker in of himself, but being the kicker because you could get involved in the tackling and everything like that. I think what we are going to see is we're going to see everything thrown at the wall in preseason to see what works, what doesn't work. And then I think they're going to, game this out through the course of preseason.
Andy, so now the Packers, their plan are to do 2 joint practices this year, right?
Yep.
So Denver and so I mean, are you going to during those time Denver and we're at Denver and who's
Baltimore, and
thank
yep.
you. Yep. So those 2. Do you think there'll be a lot of experimenting going on there as well? Because let's be honest, those joint practices are probably the most valuable practices that this team gets for your starters.
Yeah, and guess who's the head coach in Baltimore? Jim Harbaugh, right? There's no chance that Jim Harbaugh is not going to want to work that stuff out when he comes to Green Bay. I'm sure they're going to be working on it quite a bit during that practice. And like I said, I think they're going to be gaming it out in preseason to try to figure out what works, what does not work. Where can we get him? Are you trying to angle this, and sort of coffin corner it so it gets down to like the 5-yard line in a corner so everyone can sort of crash in one direction? I think these are all different things that these teams are going to try. It's interesting because, hang time does not matter because you can't move until they touch the ball anyway.
Sure.
So like hang time becomes less of an issue. I think ball placement. And then if you do have a guy that can, if all of a sudden they're going with one returner back there and you drill a kick in one direction and you can get it to bounce inside the, 15-yard line and ricochet out of bounds, that's going to have a huge advantage as well. So these guys are going to try just about everything to game this out and figure out what's the best way to go about it in preseason.
Yeah. All right. How are you guys covering whether there's any movement on the Jordan Love contract situation? Are you just sitting around waiting for smoke signals to come out of Packer headquarters? Like, how do you even report on something that is so shrouded in mystery right now?
Yeah, that's the thing. I always joke, like when people say, and this is like obviously like slightly unrelated, but when people say like, how is Adam Stenavich doing as an offensive coordinator? I'm like, how am I supposed to know? Like, how are we supposed to evaluate this stuff? It's the same thing like with a GM or a negotiation. Like we don't get, unfortunately, play by play of like, well, here's what Green Bay's offering and here's what the agency is coming back with. So until we get that final word, and I'm sure Rappaport or Schefter or somebody will have the breaking news that Jordan Love has finalized his contract. I think everyone's discussion point right now is when do you start to panic? And I think it seems, per Brian Gutekunst and you guys, congratulations on that. That was a awesome segment. Exactly. You guys got the scoop that everyone wants to get this done by training camp. I think that's sort of the first deadline. And then if things start to roll into that first preseason game, then you start getting into the conversations of, well, I don't think Jordan's going to want to play in those games if he doesn't have a contract set. So I don't think you want to get to that point. I think, week before training camp is probably where you start saying, all right, let's get this done, guys.
Real quick, Kurt in the Key wants to know what happens to the onside kick.
That's a great question. I have to go back and look at the rules a little bit. My apologies for not being up to date quite as much on the kick rules yet.
Rule for that.
Yeah.
The sneak onside kick is no longer.
It's only fourth quarter.
The current onside kick rules apply if onside kick goes beyond the setup zone untouched, kicking team penalized for UNS.
But you'll know it's an onside kick because of the new formation.
And not till the fourth quarter, if I remember correctly. And you have to
the fourth quarter, absolutely. And
you have to declare it. So yeah, otherwise I think it's the exact same as it was previously. And correct me if I'm wrong. Do you have to be trailing too at the time?
Probably.
That I could be wrong on.
Trailing, yes.
Yep. So you have to be trailing in the fourth quarter.
Trailing has the opportunity to declare an onside kick to the officials.
Yep.
Totally stupid, unnecessary, but you know what? I'll still watch football.
Exactly.
All right. Andy Herman, Pack a Day Podcast. As always, a pleasure, my friend. Thank you, sir.
You bet. You guys have a great day.
We got Summerfest tickets to give away right now. You can win a